welcome to The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics, expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. US President Joe Biden and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron will meet next month as the countries work to repair relationships following a diplomatic brouhaha that broke out over a security pact with Australia that scuppered a multi-billion-dollar submarine contract. In a joint statement, France and the United States said that the two leaders spoke by phone and agreed to meet in Europe at the end of October. Can the two countries overcome their disagreements following the rift that emerged as a result of the trilateral Indo-Pacific Pact? The World Health Organization has tightened its air quality guidelines for the first time since 2005, warning that air pollution is one of the biggest environmental threats to human health, causing 7 million premature deaths a year. The United Nations Health Agency said that urgent action is needed to reduce exposure to air pollution. Are these guidelines just the first step? And what can leaders do to strengthen the fight against pollution? And UEFA has called on FIFA to stop what it sees as its promotional campaign in support of biennial World Cups and to consult widely instead. The Executive Committee of the European football's governing body released a statement highlighting serious concerns it has with the plans drawn up by former Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger, which could involve a major tournament taking place every summer. Is a European boycott of the World Cup possible, and what would be the consequences? So, these are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. A new security partnership in the Asia-Pacific will see the United Kingdom and the United States provide Australia with the technology and capability to deploy nuclear-powered submarines. But what are the details of the pact? This infographic explains. The office of the French president says that Emmanuel Macron will send his ambassador back to Washington after he held a conciliatory phone call with US President Joe Biden on Wednesday.
Following last week's sudden and stunning rift over a global arms deal, France and the U.S. are working to restore normal relations. The office of French President Emmanuel Macron said on Wednesday he would send his ambassador back to Washington after a phone call with U.S. President Joe Biden.
Australia.
The French cried foul last week after news broke that the U.S. and U.K. had secretly negotiated a deal to sell nuclear submarines to Australia. As a result, Australia nixed a $40 billion deal to buy warships from France. In dramatic fashion, Macron recalled his envoys from Washington and Canberra. The episode marked a rare diplomatic rebuke between close military allies. not all saw the French outcry as proportionate. On Wednesday, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson told his French counterparts, in French, to, quote, get a grip and give me a break.
I just think it's time for some of our dearest friends around the world to, prenez un grip about all this, and donnez-moi un break, because this is fundamentally a great step forward for global security.
Following Wednesday's phone call between Macron and Biden, the French president's office said the leaders agreed to launch in-depth consultations to rebuild trust. The White House on Wednesday said Macron and Biden will meet in Europe at the end of October.
French and European engagement, I should say, in the Indo-Pacific region, something that we look forward to continuing to work with them on. And as we said in the readout, the French ambassador will return to Washington next week, and he will then start intensive work with U.S. officials. So that will be part of the ongoing next steps that we go from here. And as we also noted, they will meet in Europe at the end of October.
And now joining us live from New York is political analyst and professor at State University of New York Maritime College, Mark Marovich. Mark, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. Before we talk about the disputes between the various countries, can you give us your perspective on this tripartite deal that's been struck between the United States, United Kingdom and Australia for nuclear submarines? Can you... what's your view on that?
Look, this is a necessary deal. So again, the Biden administration tries to pursue a policy but botches its implementation like it did in Afghanistan. Look, in order to counter China, Australia becoming nuclear and having nuclear submarines is absolutely essential. It's not going to have nuclear weapons. But the Chinese have lagged behind the nuclear submarines, and it's not happening overnight. It's going to happen over a number of years, but it is definitely a very, very big step. How it was handled was absolutely horrible. They're going to have a dinner in Washington in honor of French-American friendship since the beginning. There was the French who saved America in this Revolutionary War. Really, this is a badly implemented policy. And of course, canceling a deal like this in the billions of dollars means the French lose not only prestige and reputation, but they lose jobs. And, and the way it was done, too, was kind of very much stealthily done. So all the optics right before the UN meetings, it just was very, very calamitous the way it was done. So I don't think it's going to be cured very, very soon, frankly.
And as you say, the initial reaction from the French side was with very strong words from Foreign Minister Le Drian, saying that it had been lied to, that there had been stabbed in the back. This isn't normal diplomatic talk, is it?
Not from France. I mean, and the irony of it is that France has an Indo-Pacific, is a player in the Indo-Pacific. It has an Indo-Pacific strategy, has a key element working with the United States on countering China in the Indo-Pacific. So the whole idea of it, the way it was done, was very clumsy. And, I want to say to Boris Johnson, give me a break, Boris. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is something that you just do to an ally and you just move on. That was the whole problem with Afghanistan. So the United States pulled out and didn't consult Boris Johnson and the other NATO allies. And now they do a secret deal, admittedly with Australia. And on that, I would say the Aussies have been friends of the United States since every war they have fought with us and died with Americans. So Americans and Aussies are very close. But the French, I mean, really? They're an essential player in Europe. So what does this mean? Does this mean Biden is shifting his focus completely to China and he's abandoning Europe? Is that what it means? Because that was Macron's criticism, that NATO was dead and that the Europeans were being overshadowed and that, that France and the European allies should have their own strategic autonomy. Is that what we want? I don't think so. So I think this was handled very badly, but at the same time, it's a necessary step in order to counter China, and Australia can do it.
You already mentioned the special type of diplomatic language that Boris Johnson was using, his franglais, and also saying donnez sorry, prenez le grip. Get a grip on yourselves. But there have been several missteps, not just in this administration, the previous administration, in terms of international relations. We won't forget the tree that Macron planted in the White House grounds that later disappeared or died. Nobody's quite sure what happened to it. But as you say, the other thing there was the distancing from NATO. So comes at a fairly sensitive time when America is trying to rebuild some relationships with Europe, especially. The relationships between US, UK, and Australia are fairly natural relationships, given the history. But is this threatening to go down a path which is splitting up the NATO alliance?
Well, first of all, this is post-Brexit Britain. I mean, this is Britain that, jumped out of the EU. And furthermore, I would say, if you think about it, the Five Eyes who share intelligence, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK, no French over there, no French involvement in that. So, I think the French are feeling very unloved. I mean, in terms of maybe the direction here is more a kind of Anglophone or Anglo-oriented and kind of over-distancing from the French. And and again, as I say, I mean, what was the timing here? You have all the diplomats here, as you say, Le Drian, and all the, Macron is involved, and, and it's just, how did the French overcome the sensitivity? There was Biden at the summits, right? Trying to revive, as you said, NATO. Right? He has the G7, the NATO, the EU. He has these meetings, great meetings. We're all going to get together. And guess what we're getting together on? China. And trying to get the French and the other Europeans to buy into this, revitalize NATO, right? To be on the, in the partnership with the United States to counter China. And then what does the United States do? It enters into this deal. It cancels the French deal, which is billions of dollars, admittedly for diesel submarines. And does this deal does the kibosh on the French deal and does the deal with Australia? I mean, there had to be a better way to do this. And it's called diplomacy. And I don't think the timing was right. And again, if you pull out of Afghanistan and you don't consult your allies, after you go to a summit and you want to have your allies help you, and then you create a rift with a major country, in fact, one of the permanent members of the United Nations, and then you expect them, as Boris Johnson says, get over it. Donnez-moi un break. Hey, you know what? It's just, you're oversensitive. I mean, he's got to be kidding. The UK and France historically have had some disagreements and some problems and issues historically going back into history. And Europe has to work together. How do they work together if the United States is not going to encourage that and is going to create these kind of scenarios? It was a blunder, really, I think.
We should also remember that at the same time, one of the other things in the equation is that Europe is talking about creating a European military. So that's something which, in a sense, offsets the guilt that the other three might be feeling.
Look, Andy, there's no future for that. I mean, that without American leadership, Europe can do what they want to do, but they need the United States and its military prowess and its global power in order to be defended against the counter against Russia and now China. Look, the need for nuclear submarines is quite significant because the Chinese reacted, they went berserk over this because these submarines, first of all, the United States has never shared nuclear technology except with the UK. They've done this with Australia. And these subs can remain at sea, hidden away for years. And that is an essential element of countering China, which has ratcheted up significantly its military development and its nuclear capabilities. So this came just at the right time. From the point of view of geopolitical issues, yes, but not in an alliance because, look, Biden says at the United Nations, I want to have diplomacy. I don't want to have war. I don't want a Cold War. I want to have relentless diplomacy. And I ask you, this is relentless diplomacy where you blow off your major ally in Europe? An ally that's already been feeling insecure and talking about strategic autonomy, and this is how you treat them. And I mean, just saying it just reputationally, how do the French react to this? I mean, yes, they're going to send their ambassador back. Sure. You know, I mean, this is not the United States, the Soviet Union. I mean, they're going to send their ambassador, you know, they're going to patch it up. The United States is going to have to do some actions that are going to ameliorate this. That's fine. But the bitterness of it and how this was done, I don't think I think it lasts. I think it lasts. Where it goes, it's hard to say. I don't see France going to becoming an adversary of the United States, but they're certainly not going to be an enthusiastic ally at this point. And we need enthusiastic allies like France, especially in the Indo-Pacific. That is the irony of it. Mm-hmm. So it ended up being a worthy idea from the geopolitical point of view, but a badly implemented diplomatic step. And I think they get an F in diplomacy in the Biden administration.
Right. Well, they'll have to hope that you're not grading them. Now, the apology that came has been described as a non-apology, as it's while it apologised for the lack of consultation that appeared to have taken place, it didn't apologise for the policy itself of forming this alliance. In a sense, though, the only harm to the French at this stage is a loss of face and a loss of a big contract to build submarines. In the long term, the relationships between these countries will, pragmatics say that they have to be rebuilt because they are long-term allies with similar goals and intentions. So really, the only thing that's been lost here is perhaps some talking time and a contract worth a lot of money for the country. Has anything else really been lost in the long term?
Well, I mean, it remains to be seen. I mean, look, you know, this is France that gave America the Statue of Liberty. I mean, really, there's a real visual here, perception of what's going on here in terms of, you know, Biden's ability to do diplomacy. That's a big issue. Are they going to patch it up? Yes, they have to. It's a very, very turbulent world. So France and America can't be enemies. It doesn't work. Will there be concessions to France in some respect? I'm quite sure. They're talking about helping the French with anti-terrorist actions in the Sahel or whatever. There will be concessions. Things will be done to patch it up. But the allies of the United States, having seen what happened in Afghanistan and having seen how the United States basically ditched its ally here in favor of another ally, a very good ally, these are good allies, it sends a message to our allies, you know, about the trust that they can have in the United States and its word. And that to me is the lasting issue. Yes, they'll patch it up and they'll have ambassadors again and they'll have a good relationship again because there's no choice. There has to be a good relationship. But at the same time, the feeling about it will be vitiated, I think, in terms of how the French and Americans, how we feel about each other, is going to be affected because, you know, you don't treat an ally like that. And again, it could have ramifications for how allies around the world feel about trusting the United States. Or maybe if you do that to France, well, maybe you'll do that to South Korea or Japan or India. I mean, anything's possible. That was not the right way to do it. The right way to do it was to get with them, tell them what we were doing, and try to do the damage control in advance before announcing this thing and basically, slapping them in the face in a way. I hate to say it, but the French have a lot of pride, and you hurt their pride. And with the British, can you imagine? There's Boris Johnson. Oh, get over it. Oh, it's not so terrible. Really? If it happened to Britain, they wouldn't like it at all. No, and it happened to Britain because Boris Johnson tried to call Biden on the phone for 48, 70 hours or whatever it is to find out what was going on in Afghanistan, and he couldn't get Biden on the phone. That's what I read. So, hey, is it okay if it happens to another ally, but not okay if it happens to you? I don't think that's the way you conduct relentless diplomacy. That's what Biden wants to do, and he's not doing it very well.
Well, we'll have to see where all this goes. Of course, there are many other issues outside of the submarines in terms of working together, and the issues in the Indo-Pacific are long-term issues to be resolved. Mark Merritt, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your analysis. Thank you. The French ambassador to the United States will return to Washington next week after Paris recalled its envoy in anger over the surprise partnership between the United States, United Kingdom and Australia, which included the US helping Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. The coming weeks will show how the pact will influence relations between the affected countries. For now, let's move on to our next topic to speak about the World Health Organization's air quality guidelines. Climate change and environmental disasters are global problems, and the whole world suffers from their impacts. Our following infographic explains what you need to know. The World Health Organization has raised concerns over air pollution following the publishing of its first air quality guideline, urging the world's top polluters to take immediate action.
The World Health Organization on Wednesday issued its first air quality guidelines since 2005, aimed at reducing deaths from key pollutants that cause cardiovascular and respiratory diseases by moving to clean energy.
Since the last update in 2005, a substantial new body of evidence has accumulated, further demonstrating the degree to which air pollution affects all parts of the body, from the brain to a growing baby in a mother's womb, at even lower concentrations than previously observed. That's why these new guidelines include low recommended levels for pollutants, including particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ozone.
The UN agency, in advice to its 194 member states, slashed the recommended maximum levels for several pollutants, including particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide, both of which are found in fossil fuel emissions. The WHO cited clear evidence of the damage inflicted by air pollution on human health at even lower concentrations than previously understood. Long-term exposure to even lower concentrations of ambient and household air pollution can cause diseases including lung cancer, heart disease, and strokes, resulting in an estimated 7 million premature deaths each year.
I urge all countries to put these guidelines to use, to save lives, support healthy communities, and help address the climate crisis. These guidelines come at an important time, ahead of the COP26 climate change conference in November.
People living in low and middle-income countries are hit the hardest due to urbanization and economic development heavily reliant on burning fossil fuels.
I'm now joined live from New Orleans in the United States by Robert Collins, who's a professor of urban studies and public policy at Dillard University. Professor Collins, thank you for joining us again here today on The Edge.
Thank you.
This week has been the United Nations General Assembly. They've been talking about climate change. At the end of next month, the COP26 summit kicks off in Glasgow, where the world leaders again will be focusing on climate issues and trying to resolve things. This report that's just come out from the World Health Organization about air pollution has some fairly startling warnings about the number of deaths that air pollution is causing. It's the first time it's been updated for, I think, 15 years. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, primarily what the World Health Organization did was they strengthened their regulations and their definitions of what they consider healthy air. There's a technical measure that they use called the Pm25 measure, which PM just stands for particulate matter, and it's how they measure the amount of air pollution within the air. So basically, according to the new limits, the average annual PM2 concentration should be no higher than 5 micrograms per cubic meter. So they basically cut the regulation in half. They basically allowed twice as many PM25s in the air before this. So so it's a technical measure, and it's sort of a technical definition. Reading through the report, and I read through the entire report today. My main concern with the report is that most countries were not following the old guidelines. So I'm not really hopeful that countries are going to follow a stricter set of guidelines when most countries were not following the old guidelines, because there's no real enforcement mechanism. It sort of depends on it's sort of the honor system right now. So until the WHO and until the United Nations encourages the developing countries to perhaps enforce this through some sort of treaty arrangement, some sort of trade agreements. I just don't see countries meeting the stricter measure when they were not meeting the older, less stringent measure.
Air pollution, obviously, is something that, in one sense, is quite easy to understand. We think about, if we go back to people going down the coal mines and coming up with lung infections because of the amount of coal dust in the air. That's very easy to envisage. But also today in the news we see pictures of cities like Delhi and some Chinese cities with very high levels of smog. And back in I guess in my childhood, smog was becoming a thing of the past in the UK. But this is still a problem all around the world, isn't it? Not just in the rich countries, or not just in the poorer countries, rather, but also in the richer countries. It's an ongoing problem. But what actually, we talk about the guidelines and enforcing guidelines and countries not following the guidelines. What basic things do countries need to do to bring down the level of pollution in the country, in the locales?
Well, of course, and you mentioned that smog is not just a problem in the developing world, and that's certainly true. I mean, here in the United States, in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles is well known for its smog problem even today, even with a country that's more cognizant of pollution. And so
that's that brown cloud when we fly down into LAX, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Everyone who's ever visited Los Angeles is familiar with the smog, and so it's a problem worldwide. So obviously the pollution comes from several sources. Burning forests, deforestation. In the United States, it primarily comes from burning fossil fuels, primarily from automobile transportation, burning oil, burning coal in industries, in factories. So, the solution is very clear. You're going to have to put restrictions on factories burning coal, burning oil. You're going to have to begin a transition to renewable energy resources, solar power, wind power, hydroelectric, there's going to have to be, not just a restriction of emissions, because of course people still need energy, people still need to drive, people still need to light their homes, and so there's going to have to be a concerted effort while you're reducing emissions in coal and oil and other fossil fuels. There's going to have to be a concentrated effort to actively assist in the movement to solar, to wind, to electric vehicles. And that's probably going to take, well, I shouldn't say probably, that's definitely going to take some sort of government subsidies to help private industry to make that transition, because private industry, if just left to the free market, they're not going to be able to do it by themselves. The market is not going to support that.
And that's because of the research that needs to go into the development of all of this, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So right now, the bottom line is this. For example, in the United States, the oil industry is going to say, the energy industry is going to say, right now, oil is the most cost-effective source of energy that we have. We can talk bad about it, we can talk about the pollution, but it's the most cost-effective energy that we have. Any other form of energy right now is simply too expensive to implement. So sure, you can power a city with wind and solar, but the electric bills of your customers would be 3 times what they are now, and just because of the technology is not advanced enough to bring the cost down right now. And so, we can't pass that cost on to our customers. So the only way we're going to be able to keep the cost at a reasonable level is to receive some sort of government subsidy, both for research and development, and also just to assist with the transition. There's a lot of new equipment that needs to be purchased. So there's going to have to be, and this is not just the United States I'm talking about, this is worldwide. There's going to have to be some sort of intervention in the market and some sort of subsidies provided for the energy companies to be able to afford to make that transition.
Now, there are very obvious reasons for taking good heed of these new guidelines because of the health issues involved, from cardiovascular diseases. It's even suggesting that there could be links to diabetes and other illnesses. So, and of course, the mortality rate is so excessively high because of this. Why has it taken so long for these guidelines to be revised? And secondly, is the timing of this announcement perhaps fortuitous with the COP26 meeting coming up, which will have very much the same goals as these guidelines suggest?
Well, for the timing, I'm certain, was specifically timed since we're about to have the climate summit. And so the timing of the announcement of the new guidelines was to attempt to put political pressure and public relations pressure on the countries that are coming to the climate summit so that they can negotiate new emission guidelines there. So that was the purpose for the timing. Now, as far as, do I think it's realistic? Well, the challenge has always been the biggest polluters in the world are simply not cooperating. China, obviously, being the biggest one. And so until you can give China some sort of economic incentive to come to the table, and really, the only incentive I think you could give them, there would have to be some sort of trade negotiations. You would have to agree to give China some new markets that they don't have now, or something of this nature. There has to be some sort of financial incentive for China to reduce its emissions. Otherwise, they're just going to say, well, we can't afford to put these new standards in place. I mean, the problem with when you argue it from a health standpoint is health is something that affects us down the road. And so people don't really want to talk about health. You know, the economy is something that affects us right now. China's going to say, you know, we have to have jobs for our people now. We have to have money now. We have to produce, you know, this energy now. And so that's always, you know, the issue, you know, when you're arguing health against, you know, against affordable energy. So, you know, there's going to have to be some sort of economic incentives. Sanctions haven't really worked. So it's going to have to be some sort of economic incentives for China, opening up new markets for them to get them to come to the table and negotiate lower emission standards.
Well, it certainly seems that, as you say, economics are very easy to understand because you can see the result in your bank balance straight away. But the twin needs of improving health, which 5-10 years down the road is fairly close to see. We can understand how people may be still rejecting this idea of climate change, which is so clearly happening. All these three things together, can they finally knock our leaders' heads together to bring about change in the way that our world is managed?
Well, you know, I think people are seeing the destabling effects of climate change and of us not taking this seriously over the past few decades. You know, in addition to the obvious health effects that have been measured for the long term, we see, you know, stronger, more lethal storms here in the United States and, you know, all over the world. In the United States, we just, where I live in Louisiana, we were just hit with Hurricane Ida. And the interesting thing about Hurricane Ida is that it didn't just kill people in the state of Louisiana and in the coastal areas. It actually killed more people in inland areas of New Jersey and New York, because the remnants actually went all the way across the country and flooded major parts of inland United States. So hurricanes are so strong now, they're so powerful, you know, that they no longer just affect coastal areas, they now affect inland areas, and they kill people hundreds of miles inland. So, you know, so it's just, you know, as we see the entire overall destabilizing effects of stronger storms, we're going to have to get serious about climate change because, you know, it's lethal. It's not an academic issue. It's literally lethal. It's killing people. You know, it's killing people.
And as Boris Johnson said, quoting the Muppet Kermit the Frog in the United Nations, it's not easy being green, but it's something we've got to take notice of, and we've got to move forward. Professor Robert Collins, thank you so much for joining us today on The Edge and giving us your analysis. Thank you. The new guidelines come just weeks before the COP26 global climate gets underway in the Scottish city of Glasgow on the 31st of October. The World Health Organization said that alongside climate change, air pollution is one of the major environmental threats to human health, adding that improving air quality would enhance climate change mitigation efforts. We hope that decisions taken at the summit on the 31st of October will contribute to the fight against climate change and air pollution. And now for our final topic, let's discuss FIFA's plan to hold the World Cup after every 2 years. With 211 affiliated associations, FIFA gives financial and logistical support through various programs. Our infographic has more. European football's governing body, UEFA, has urged FIFA to stop pushing its plan for a two-year World Cup and to instead engage in a genuine consultation over reform of the international match calendar.
FIFA is conducting a feasibility study into holding the World Cup on a biennial basis, a change from the current four-yearly cycle, but has made no secret of its desire to switch to such a format. Arsene Wenger, the former Arsenal manager who is now FIFA's head of global football development, said that this month he was 100% convinced of the switch. UEFA said that there are numerous concerns about the impact of such a switch, including the dilution of the World Cup's value, risks of players being overworked, and women's football suffering from annual men's tournaments. UEFA President Alexander Ciferin warned this month of a potential European boycott of the World Cup if FIFA's plans went ahead.
UEFA highlighted four key dangers in the FIFA proposals: the dilution in the mystique around major tournaments, the erosion of opportunities for weaker teams, the impact on player welfare, and on the development of the women's game. Competitions forced to go head-to-head the same summer. The coming months will show whether this plan goes ahead or not and how fans react to it. Our analysts from around the world provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's have a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top stories, shared with the hashtag FIFA. And here's what you had to say about FIFA on Twitter. Richard David Pike said, "A biennial World Cup just creates too many problems. Calendar already too full of football, oversaturation. Player welfare, can't keep having more games, more burnout for players. What happens to Euros, Copa America, AFCON, Gold Cup, AFC Asia Cup, if World Cup every 2 years? Ali Walker says, breaking, the EU comes out against FIFA's biennial World Cup plan. European Commission Vice President says he fully shares European football's doubts about the controversial proposal." And Deji Sadiq says, UEFA urges FIFA to stop pushing biennial World Cup plan. European football's governing body voices numerous concerns about a plan to hold the World Cup every 2 years. Let's now take a look at our video of the day, which shows the transformation is possible to protect our environment. That's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boyne. Stay tuned as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.